Welcome to Next 365's podcast, Between Two Experts. I'm David Huether, and with me I have my resident expert, Mike Petersen, and with us we have our special guest, Richard Rodriguez. This podcast is going to focus on how things get started with an organization and the relationship and the details that go into a project. So today we're going to focus a little bit more on some of the challenges that exist out there. If you listen to some of the experts like Gartner estimates that between 55 and 75% of ERP projects fail to meet the expected outcomes of what was wanted from the organization. So today we're going to dive into a couple of those topics. Richard and I actually have a long history together where Richard was a client where we first started off a very casual conversation about what the organization needed, what they were looking to do. And it progressed through months of conversations to really get there. Mike's no stranger to that as well, obviously being in the role that you've been in working with clients. So I thought today, let's spend a little bit of time just talking about some of the challenges that happen when you go into these things and go from there and see if people can take away some nuggets from this information. So Rich, maybe we'll start with, when you were looking for some solutions to what the organization needed, what were some of those hallmarks that you and the organization needed to have as an outcome of the project? And maybe how did that translate into not just the statement of work and the spirit of how you work together, but how did it actually translate to what happened?
So obviously the first thing is, looking at the right system, evaluations, not everything, no matter what every ERP company tells you, they're not all fit for purpose. I mean, it depends on your company size, how many locations you have, employees, things you're looking for, customization. I mean, there's all kinds of things that go into it, right?
Yeah.
Assuming that you finally come down to the system that you want, then, internally it's talking to the internal stakeholders, what are they looking for, getting kind of their list of, need to haves, nice to haves, want to haves. You kind of get all that. And then from there, then it, comes into finding an implementation partner that you start to have conversations with. And then you have to vet them, go through all those things, and then once you kind of have gotten through all that, I think that's when you can finally start to have that conversation. And it's kind of a two-pronged conversation because you've got to have the conversation with the ERP provider, obviously, but then, who your implementation partner is going to be as well.
Yep. Let's talk a little bit about the expectations that flow through that process, right? As I mentioned, we spent months and months really evaluating not just the functionality, the scope of the project, but really kind of the rules of engagement that evolved through that. And I think that's one of the challenges that always come through these things is, talking about the expectations that you had for your team to engage in a project of this magnitude, in addition to obviously the services team that you were working with. What were some of the things that you maybe expected or thought your team would absolutely be able to work on and accomplish, where maybe there were some challenges?
I've been through a lot of these implementations, and, most of the time from the customer side, everybody's gung-ho when they first start. You need the solution, you want it to work out well. Everybody says, of course I'm going to put, subject matter experts to get trained, and they're going to show up to every training. Of course we're going to do data cleansing. We want to have good data, and we know, bad data in means bad data out. And yes, we commit to whether it's engineering or sales, and everybody starts out, on the same page.
Yeah.
And as you continue to go, it's been my experience that, the longer a project takes, the less engaged people become, right? Because it's not right in front of them. It's not something that they see tomorrow. So, blowing off a training session or, not getting to that data to cleanse it just becomes, and you'll hear it all the time. It's like, oh, well, I have this customer meeting, or, oh, I have to take care of this, everything's always urgent, right? I mean, especially for most of what we're dealing with, in those manufacturing environments and those delivery environments, there's always something that's hot. There's always something that's a priority, and it's very easy to push this to the back burner because it's not right in front of you. You don't see the consequences of that today, right? You don't see them show up until you're getting close to that go live, or after the switch is flipped, and then everybody freaks out and it's like, what do I do?
Right.
So, to me, that's one of the key things that, I've always told people is you have a responsibility because, in that SOW, you have lined out what your responsibilities are as a client and what you have to do, versus what the provider's doing from, the ERP side, but then also what the implementer is doing from their side. Right. And, you have to meet those expectations, because if you don't, you're setting everybody else up for failure.
Yeah.
Right. Because, and then that's when you get into trouble, right? Because then you have the finger pointing and you have, well, this didn't turn out how I thought it was going to turn out. And, of course, at that point, it's nobody's fault, right? It's always somebody else's fault.
Right.
And at the end of the day, it doesn't help anybody, because you're in a situation where now you have to fix it, and going through, rehashing all of what didn't go right. It's not the right time to do that. There's always a post-mortem that you do to evaluate that kind of stuff. But
Yeah.
that then and there, that's not the time for it. And unfortunately, that's usually the time when it comes up and people are looking for somebody to blame, rather than, hey, we got to fix this problem because now we're in this, and now we have books to close, and we have orders to get out, and we have, bills to pay, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
So,
Yep.
Well, and I can say from the implementation side, it's a little bit different, because when that inevitably occurs, it's very easy to begin to blame the implementer on everything that's gone wrong. From that standpoint, it is a conversation that I've had a lot of times with customers around how do you measure whether you're on point, whether you're in position. This is not generally these people's day in, day out job. And so they don't really know whether they're doing the job correctly, whether they know their own job, they know what has to be an output, but how to get from A to B is not necessarily something they have a lot of experience in.
Yeah.
As little as you want to do a post, that's almost the time you have to do a post, and you have to figure out how not to turn it into that blame game.
Mm.
How do you turn it into, okay, what have we done to here? What do we not do going forward to make sure we don't end up in this same place in a cycle 2 as we're running through it? And it's very difficult, because ERP is very emotional. It's touching every part of a business. Everybody wants to be employed, otherwise they wouldn't be there. And usually it's your people that have been around a long time, know your business the longest, and they're very proprietary about what it is they're doing and how they're doing, and they should be. It's important. Businesses need those people. But to be able to take that step back and get them, have, as you noted, the relationship with them, that you can have that conversation and be able to have that back and forth. Just, look, we need to do X, Y, and Z, and we need to do it differently. And how can I help you do this differently next time around?
Yeah, I agree with that to an extent, but it all, we're touching more on the relationship now, but I also think too that, it needs to be whoever each person puts forward, from the implementer to the provider, to the ERP provider, to the person that's really taking on from the customer side. Whoever those 3 people are, at the end of the day, they need to develop a very good relationship, because they've got to overcome these things.
Yeah.
But even more important, they've got to be able to, they got to be able to swing a big bat inside their own organizations. Because if you put somebody in that role, that for any of the 3 that is the lead person, and they don't have that sway to be able to make things happen, you're really setting yourself up for failure from the beginning. Because, one, you can't have a real conversation with them, because they're not going to have the power to either put more people on it, or bring people in when they need to, or adjust and say, okay, this is changing, and we need to do an addendum to the SOW. We need to do a change order. Oh, well, that's not really my thing. I have to talk to 4 other people before I can authorize that. That takes right. And then it just, before you know it, it's just issue after issue after, and then people start to lose confidence in each other. And then it's a disaster. Right.
I think you touch on a really good point there. I think that the spirit of the contracts to the project are one thing, where you try to spell out as much detail as you can, eliminate the vagueness of the work that's going on. But you have to have the stakeholders from all of those different elements invested and regularly updated into the confines of the project so that you can make decisions quickly, so that you can look at things with everyone who's got something to lose in this project is committed to fixing it and fixing it quickly. I think that's a really good point. I think a lot of people maybe at the top level float into a project and then they float out. And then the team's left holding the bag, so that those metrics that are going to be really important at the end of the day kind of get distorted because the team's stakeholders haven't been there.
Very often something that's missed out of this. People go through and it's very much a feel. I feel like the project is going like this. I think the project is going like this. And it's very important up front. Not that you necessarily get it 100% right immediately, but having those metrics spelled out early on so that you're working towards those metrics that hopefully you've set up to produce the outcomes that you want at the end of the day. Those outcomes should be listed as well. But how do you know you're getting there? How do you know you're moving there? And be willing to revisit them a lot. Because if you're not willing to revisit them and understand what's going on and then fall back on the metrics, then just like any organization, everybody can bring their own data in and interpret it any way they want to. And then it becomes a question of how is that person really telling me what's going on or just what makes them look good?
So let's use that. Let's go back to the start. If you could set up utopia for a significant project like this so that you do have all of the stakeholders in place, you do have the metrics, what kind of meeting of the minds do you think would take place that would set the stage for a really strong start, but continual understanding so that when you do come into problems, because you will have challenges,
Always.
You'll have change that will impact a project almost every time. What does that initial meeting of the minds, do you think, look like if you could establish that?
I think the point where you brought in, there will be change. I think that meeting of the minds is an important one right up front, and being in agreement. How do you decide this is a change? This isn't what's in there. How are you on the same page so that you're presenting to the project team, both with the implementer and with the client, one leadership face? Yes, there's been change, but we're all on the same page with where we need to go and how we need to get there. And now we can move forward to get there.
Yeah, I think, again, they all start well. It's usually not the start that's the issue. It's, and again, every organization is different. If it's going to be a 6-month implementation, a 9-month, a year-long implementation, it's always when you get past that, however long it is, it's always when you get past that first kind of third of the project, that's when everybody starts to lose focus. They start to lose enthusiasm for it. It's not in front of them every day. So it again, to me, it's not the start. It's at that third point, having the relationship to somebody's got to be able to call it out of one of the three leaders of those organizations to say, hey, time out. Like, we're getting off track. We've canceled 2 meetings in the last 3 weeks, or these people haven't showed up, or going back to whatever it is, calling out metrics. Hey, we were supposed to have 40% of the data cleaned by now, and we're at 10%, and it hasn't moved in 2 weeks. Like, being able to show tangible stuff and then call it and say, hey, we got to regroup because we're getting off track. And having that relationship to be able to do, whoever it is, that you're going to say, okay, and you're going to come to the table and say, all right, we gotta refocus on this stuff.
I think that's where the experts do have to come to the table, because not only do you have to recognize when that event occurs, but you have to know what to do to fix it. And I think that's the other challenge that you find in the heat of the battle is both parties are so focused on doing what they need to do is they maybe don't get that opportunity to recognize and how to fix it. And it's a lesson I learned early in my career where the president of the company had said to us in a project that was challenged, I wish you'd come into my office sooner and told me this. I could have helped fix it sooner. We could have gotten through it better. And I think that does ring true to not just recognizing it, but having the metric, but having the relationship, having the wherewithal to call it out and start to resolve it for sure.
Well, and then also back to metrics, making sure that your internal metrics meet the external metrics of the entire project, right? Because, there's been situations where, data is an easy one to point to. Hey, we should be at this level and this is not done. But then the implementer will be like, well, like by my internal metrics, like my team's doing everything. That was your responsibility. That was your thing.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
and rather than saying like, hey, this is a challenge. What's the challenge? You know, maybe something changed in the business, and you know, it's to say, hey, we need a change, and maybe I now understand your business enough. I can offer up additional resources. We can make a change order to this because you need more people for data cleansing. I can help you with that. Like looking for solutions rather than just kind of like, well, I'm doing my part.
Yeah.
Right. Because we've all seen that devolve, and then it just continues down that road. And then, you know, you end up in a worse place.
Yeah.
And that goes back to rather than it being a solutions discussion, it's a blame discussion.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yep.
And that's what you usually will hear from people during a blame discussion as well. We did everything and all of our metrics say it's working.
Yes.
It's just like, now I always, whenever I was with a project manager that would say that, I wanted to get up out of the chair and just choke him to death. I'm like, you're not helping the situation.
Right. Exactly.
Take a breath. We are all trying to get to the same place. We really are. Even if we don't like each other sometimes while we're doing it, because we're talking very hard about what it is that needs to happen.
Yeah.
But yes, the roll down of metrics, you know, each section having things that need to happen and making sure they're aligned to get you to that end point, and it all rolls down from there. And then, as you noted, if they change, you have to go back on those individual metrics, whether it's time, whether it's the actual activities being done,
right,
who's doing it. Do you need some help? Let's talk about how we can get you some help, or how we might be able to work this out with you to end up where we all need to be.
So in your experience being on the client side, but now also being, you know, a strategic partner to people, change orders are kind of the nasty thing. Nobody wants them. Nobody likes them.
Right.
No one really understands, you know, how you got there. And it's almost a little bit too late, but they seem to be a natural thing. How do you recommend that people look at the best way to avoid the change orders?
Well, there's two ways you can look. You can look at it as, how do I avoid the change order? Or you can look at it and say, I need a plan from the beginning that there's going to be some level of change, and I need a budget for that. I don't know what it's going to be, but something's going to happen. There's never been a perfect implementation, you know, and for a variety of reasons, right? The business could change, the environment could change, leadership changes. You can do an acquisition in the middle of something, as we've experienced, and then that completely changes things. So there's always going to be something that's there. So I always recommend to people, look, if your budget is X, I would put another 20% in there when you're getting it approved by your board or whoever, because something's gonna go wrong, right?
I've heard clients tell me, oh, we've doubled the budget, and I'm going, just how bad a time have you had in the past with this?
Oh, yes.
So
sure.
I've heard of that to myself on my own projects from clients before. Yeah, we just doubled the budget when we put it in for the board, and I'm like, you must have had something go horribly wrong somewhere along the way. You're right. You need to have contingency, just like you would on a project, for time, for schedule, all the different types of contingency. Budget contingency is extremely important, and not being afraid to go on it early, because your changes will be a lot smaller if you're on them early. If you recognize the challenges early and decide, maybe we weren't quite headed where we wanted to, so let's get that change in, even if it's not a material impact. I like to get in early when things change from the SOW, and even a $0 change order that just changes the definitions of some of the things that we're doing and the way we're doing it. Saying, let's get used to this process. Let's make it not a scary process. It's just part of the activity when we get done. It's big, because there's a lot of fear, as you note, of change order.
For sure. Yeah.
How much of a role do you think organizational change management is starting to play in looking at the initial phase of what you're doing, or the initial work you're doing, and trying to incorporate these things that happen? Are you seeing it be effective if people do it right?
If people do it right, yes. But it kind of follows that same pattern, right? There's usually, for organizational change, you know, there's a big announcement, whether it's the CEO or whoever's kind of leading that, like, hey, we're embarking on this new thing. We're going to switch from X to Y on our platform. Here's all the reasons why. You always have, within that employee base, you're always going to have, it always is, right? You have the early adopters, you have the people who are going to say, this will never work. I've been through these. It's going to be a disaster. Then you have everybody in the middle who's like, well, like, we'll see how it goes, right? I still got to do my job, and we'll see how it goes, right? Obviously, keeping those early adopters on your side is huge, because they can be, what you want to make sure is that you're getting them on key teams, you're getting them to places where that they can use their voice for that middle part of the organization to keep everybody aligned. But then, because it's way different when their peer is telling them, hey, I went into subject matter expert training. I've gone to 3 classes. Like, this is really cool compared to what we're doing now. Like, this is going to be a big change for our group, and it's so much better. And keeping that morale up, because, the negative people that are always inevitably there, it's funny, they always have a huge voice. They're not as loud, but their influence is huge, right?
Yes.
And kind of identifying some of those people, keeping them on board. But again, everybody, it starts off with a lot of fanfare. And again, you get to that middle point, and then people just forget about it. So the organizational change takes on that same sort of track. Whoever that cheerleader is, has got to be consistent in their message. If it's going to be, I'm doing a once a month update to, and it's at different levels, right? Upper management gets updated so much, the rest of the team gets updated so much, and they need to stay on that cadence. They can't be missing them, and they have to keep constant. I tell people all the time, you can't ever say too much. You'd rather over communicate for something like this,
Absolutely,
than under communicate, because when you under communicate, people are going to start to make up their own stuff for something this big, right? And it spreads fast.
Well, and OCM has turned a lot more industrial over the last decade or so within the ERP space. It was always there. There was always training. There was always all the things that you have to do because people need to know how to do their job after it's all said and done. But you're right. Advocating for the system, having your own internal people who are your champions within, and then more importantly, after it goes live, having those people that know why decisions were made, how things work, because I'm a whole lot more comfortable going to my buddy I work with day in and day out than I am necessarily going to the stranger over here that, might know the system really well, but I don't know him.
Sure.
And I don't want to look silly in front of him.
Yeah.
So, that, and then the industrial part of it has gotten into communication plans, as you noted, making sure you're meeting those communication plans. What does that look like? Events, everything necessary to start bringing it forward to the user base and getting them on board, so that the first time they're seeing it isn't when the SI is going, okay, that's great. I'm going to flip the switch now. See you guys in 3 months when you can tell me what it is that we need to do next.
Exactly.
So it's become a big piece of it, and it actually allows for a much smoother transition if you've got all of those pieces working. Unfortunately, very often organizations are looking for places where they can cut costs, as we all are.
Exactly.
And so, the very well, Richard, what are the first places you see? You've been on the other side of it. I know what I see from writing the SOW.
Right.
But what are the places that you see where customers, people are going, I think we can handle that ourselves. I think we can do it ourselves. And the reality is you don't truly have the expertise to do it. And as you noted, often bring in additional people anyway.
The number one thing is always data cleansing and then data migration. Oh, we have an internal team and we can handle that migration. It's like,
have you tried to before?
This is different.
Yeah.
Right. It's not just a lift and place from one server to another server. Right. This is not. Yeah. It's very different. Because lifting and shifting data from one on-prem server to another, or even this on-prem server to a colo, or even to the cloud. It's much different than taking data that is in SAP and moving it to Microsoft, right?
Right.
And it's just there's so much complexity to it that people don't necessarily appreciate that. That's one right away where I see people are always like, oh, we can do that ourselves. Our guys can do that. That one, security. Security is another one where like, oh, well, we have a security team and our guys will handle putting all the permissions in place and doing this and doing that. It's like, okay, again, there's ins and outs that you're not aware of on how the system works.
Compliance right? Side of that.
Exactly. Yeah. But those are usually the two places right away that people say, I have people on staff that can do that.
And there's two different challenges that run up from those two things. The data, very often what they see is it's going to be done one time. This is not so we can just throw something together and do it the one time and be done with that. I mean, let's be honest, each year the Super Bowl's only done one time. How much planning do you think goes into that before you end up getting there? How many times do they practice that halftime show before they come out? How many times do they have meetings around exactly where are you when this happens or when these things need to happen, or your contingency plans and everything else that goes into it? So while maybe the mechanics of transforming the data can be handled, the actual mechanics themselves, they do have to be handled in certain ways, and you want to have it be repeatable because you have to test it, you have to be sure it's right, you have to, all of the things that go into it. And fairly so, most organizations are not going to have people that think that way because you're not into those types of projects most of the time.
Right.
You're at the very end piece of it where you do it the one time and it's done, and now I'm maintaining it in the long term. You really wouldn't hire somebody that was an expert in how do I move data in an industrial fashion for a project and make sure it gets done over a year to make it work right. So I mean, that's challenge number one is that. But the second, as David noted on security, it's a little bit different because you don't just need to know security, especially in ERP. You have to understand business. You have to understand the regulations around it. You have to understand segregation of duties, which is very different than the technical segregation of duties that occurs. If you don't know how the AP process works, you have a hard time segregating exactly who should be doing what. And occasionally ask for things that are odd. I'll just say I've had some very interesting asks in the past on security, and that's again why you shouldn't really expect your security experts to be that.
Right.
You need to work with them. You need to have people that are experts in ERP security working with your security people because you have your own corporate requirements that layer on top of what the ERP capabilities are and regulatory.
Yeah. I think these are the kind of the conversations we try to have in the relationship part of our engagements. And we try to use tools like Eracy or things like that in documentation and as we do workshops to try to really identify the ownership. But to your point, those are always the key things that trip people up, and getting ahead of those, spending the time up front, figuring out, okay, how are we going to do this? We've got 3 staging periods of data as an example. We're going to test it, and it's going to be your responsibility to test it. And if you need help, we're here. I think those details kind of get overlooked a lot of the time. They come back and bite you.
Well, I think the other thing too is, a lot of times on the client side, people get put in charge of, you have that one overall leader, but then it's, okay, well, this person's going to handle the sales portion of it. This person's going to be the head for the engineering portion of it. This is the manufacturing person, blah, 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 on down the line. And the issue is a lot of times that, even though that person maybe, because most times it's going to be the manager of that department, right? But a lot of times by the time that person gets to that management role, they're not doing the day-to-day, right? They are now doing the reporting up to everybody else. They're doing reconciliation. They're not doing the day-to-day function. And the people that are actually doing the day-to-day function, it's inevitable. They've come up with workarounds. They've come up with, how they actually do the job that the manager doesn't know about because they're not. They're removed from that now. And so you get into this, and pick whatever discipline is like, oh yeah, the system needs to work like this because this is how we do X, Y, Z. And then you'll find out later that, when the person gets, when they start to bring people into training and stuff, how many times have you seen it that, people in purchasing are like, that's not how we buy. That's not how we do this.
Yeah.
That's not how
those aren't our vendors.
That's not how we ship. That's not how, that's not the process. And then it's like, whoa, what do you mean? And again, that's a huge one too, is making sure that from the client side, you're picking the right people that actually know how your business processes are rather than how it should be laid out, right? Because people will always find workarounds. And then that workaround, unfortunately, becomes how to do the business.
And it goes back to your champions.
Yeah.
As you do it, those champions should know, as you said, the business processes themselves, what they're doing right now, and should be talking about the why they're being done, and should be talking not just with you, but with the client's team needs to talk internally and say, we're doing this right now. Do we really have to do this, or is this just what we're trying to get to? And we do this because that's just the way our system works.
Right.
Things of that variety, because the worst time is when they come in at UAT and are like, oh no, this isn't how we do business. And it's like, I know it's not how you do business, but can you get to your end point doing this? And if not, what's missing? Can you explain to me what's missing so we can get it in there? We want to get it right.
Right. Well, and then again, a lot of organizations that don't have that strong leader, I've seen that they fall into circumstances where they want to change the ERP system to how they're doing it now rather than making it better and making the business better.
Yeah.
It's like, no, it needs to work like this. It's like, no, just because it works like this in your current system doesn't mean it has it. Right. Yeah. And getting over that hurdle, like, you have to address that early.
Yeah.
Because if you don't, they're always going to be coming back to that. Well, this doesn't work like this. This doesn't work like this. It should be like this.
Yeah.
Well, no, that's how it is now. It doesn't mean that's how it's got to be in the future. We're trying to get better. So this is why you're doing this whole thing.
Exactly.
Right.
When you went through that process internally and you identified your business process owners, did you naturally have some concerns about some of them where you're like, oh, I don't know if this person's going to be able to drive us through the process strongly enough? Or was it something that you always kind of find out too late?
I mean, I think it comes down to how involved you are in your business, right? There were definitely leaders that were picked in some of the disciplines that I wasn't sure about. And,
it's almost like, could you create something where if you had that uncertainty around a person, you can match them up with someone who maybe is stronger or something like that, or get some help for them? It's
well,
hard
I
to
think
tell.
I think at the end of the day, like, you have to not be afraid of, and every company is different, every culture is different. Like, I hate to say it, but whoever your leader for the project is, they have to be able to step up and, like, be the jerk of the organization. Like, there's no.
That's a great t-shirt. I'm the jerk of the
I
organization.
would use a different word, but, like, they
have called me that.
They have to be able to do that, right?
Yeah.
And because somebody's got to be that driver, somebody's got to be the jerk that says, like, no,
Not working.
this is not working,
Right.
and call that out and force those tough conversations. Because if that person can't do it, again, you're just, all these things are going to build up. They're not going to get addressed. And you're just going to end up with a disaster at the end.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, to me, that person has the hardest job from the client side, because not only are they managing this portion of it, but they have to be able to separate what they do every day with the rest of the organization to be able to function effectively and keep their part of the business going and the business running as it should.
Yeah.
But be able to also have that hard conversation and say, this doesn't affect this, right? Like, you may not like me here when we're in this meeting, we're having this conversation, and you want to kill me. But then when this meeting's done, we have to go work together over here. Like, this is still our job, right? And it takes a special person to do that. Whoever gets picked to lead that from a client side, they have to be the right person.
Yeah.
I think that's part of why we're seeing a lot of organizations bring in outside PMs for that and basically insulate those people one layer, because they kind of can be the jerk because they're not really part of the organization beyond the project itself.
If you could do something at the beginning of these projects to ferret that issue out, right? We know you've got competitive advantages and processes that make you unique. and we're going to focus on those. So let's get the strengths of the organization around those determined processes that are the differentiators for them in the market.
Yeah.
And not spend time in the minutia.
I think it's changed a little bit, but one of the things that always used to frustrate me as a client was, you know, whether it's an ERP company or the implementer, you know, you've obviously done multiple implementations with multiple businesses, right? So you have the experience, whether you're a paint company or a manufacturing company or whatever it is, that you've seen something somewhat similar, that when you come in and you start to do these meetings to introduce yourself and talk about what your process is and those things, it used to always frustrate me because everybody used that bicycle manufacturing example.
Right.
Always, no matter who it was always the bike factory. It's like, I don't make bikes. Like, we don't even come close to bike. We are this kind of a business. You've said that you've implemented 50 that are like us. Use an example that's like me, because to me, that would have put me much more at ease to be able to say, okay, these guys do know what they're talking about. And when we do have to have those early conversations to say, hey, can you understand my business? You're not going to be relating it back to that stupid bike diagram in that bike factory.
So true.
Right. So I think companies have gotten better at that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's always my advice to them, is whoever you're going into, you know, or if you don't have experience, at least be honest up front and say, hey, we haven't done anything like this before, and we're going to have to spend extra time up front learning your business. Because if you're investing the time on your end to learn the business, that's going to go a lot further than just trying to wing it.
Right.
And be like, well, yeah, sure, we can do this.
Yeah. Yeah. There's definitely something to be said for carrying that industry expertise forward with you and staying in your lane. And I think that's, to your point, something that people overlook. And a lot of times, let's face it, price drives some people's decisions. And sometimes you don't get that expertise for the price you want to pay. But at the end of the day,
cost, quality, speed.
Yeah.
You have two of the three. Which two do you want?
Yeah. Right. Indeed. Well, listen, I think that's been a really interesting conversation. I think your perspectives have been really interesting for us, and hopefully the audience that will view this. I appreciate you stopping in with us today and giving us some of those insights. I think what I've taken away from this is obviously, you know, the contracts in which we undergo and perform these things with are one thing, and they're important, and we want to eliminate the guesswork as much as we can through those things. But the relationship, certainly between the partners, is very important. And setting the team up for success collaboratively, you know, both internal and external, is going to be super important. And I appreciate that perspective. I think Mike and I have both been through a couple of those battles together as well. And we know the importance of really making sure that you go into these things eyes wide open, the details are covered, and you've got things detailed out as much as you can. I guess what we want to be able to offer to people outside of this conversation is certainly our ability to come in and have that discussion and figure out where some of the holes may exist for organizations and how we can help them cross the line and get those business outcomes realized that they're always looking for.
And as we've talked about, it's the client and the implementer are looking at the SOW very differently. They're looking at it for different reasons and in different ways. Both of them completely 100% honest, trying to get to the end point at the end of the day. But being able to bridge that gap between the way you're looking as a client at your SOW as you're coming through and the way that implementer is looking is going to be key to getting the outcomes you want out of the project.
Yeah. So Richard, thank you for your time. It was always a pleasure talking to you about this. If you're looking for more information or want to get a hold of us, you can follow us at www.x365group.com is our website. We've got a YouTube channel that you'll be able to find off our website. LinkedIn is always an option for reaching out to us and following us for more information. Certainly get a hold of me and Mike. We'd be happy to sit down with anyone watching this who has any questions or any concerns about what they might be going through in a project and how we might be able to help them. So yeah, thanks for joining in today. Really appreciate the time.
All right.